last night in Canada. 3 Liberal Party candidates won special elections to the Canadian Parliament, thereby solidifying the Liberal Party's full control of the Canadian government under Prime Minister Mark Carney. Prior to Donald Trump's attacks on Canada, prior to Donald Trump's deranged insults to Canada, prior to Donald Trump's publicly expressed demented desire to annex Canada to the United States and make it the 51st state, the Liberal Party was in deep, deep trouble in Canada. It was wobbling. The Conservative Party was on the rise. But then the Liberal Party rose up against the right-wing lunatic south of their border. And Canadians elected a publicly modest banker who had never run for office as the Liberal Party Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. And when Prime Minister Carney visited Donald Trump in the Oval Office, Donald Trump discovered that here was a foreign leader who had no intention of trying to flatter Donald Trump into some kind of working relationship. The Prime Minister's response to Donald Trump's trade war against Canada was to fight right back. And Canada is winning that trade war. The Prime Minister rallied the Liberal Party before the special election vote in a speech filled with thunderous applause and cheering for that mild-mannered man who never expected to be rallying Canada in opposition to the President of the United States of America. And when you listen in a moment to what the Prime Minister said, know that you are listening to the international sound of resistance to Donald Trump, and know that you are listening, in this case, to the sound of victory over Donald Trump, a sound that will be heard in this country. And listen to what that victory feels like in that audience of Canadians who never expected to be rising up against an American presidency. And listen to how the best neighbors a country could ever have, the most stable and loyal and friendly neighbors a country could ever have, Canadians. Listen to these Canadians at the very mention of Donald Trump's state of Florida, which they used to love to visit.
This is not the time for politics as usual, for petty differences, for political point scoring. United, we will build Canada strong. A Canada for all, a Canada strong that no one can ever take away. I feel that strength. I feel that strength in this room. I feel that strength. I feel that strength. As Diana mentioned, we feel that strength across this great country. At this decisive moment, Canadians are demonstrating just how strong we are. You know, it started quietly. People choosing a wine from the Okanagan over one from California. Anyone had any bourbon recently? No. Sorry. A family planning a vacation to Prince Edward Island instead of booking flights to Florida. Small individual acts of solidarity, but repeated millions of times. And together, they make a statement. We are the masters of our destiny.
Small individual acts of solidarity, repeated millions of times. That is what it will take. That's what it will take to beat Trumpism in the next congressional election and in the next presidential election. That's what can happen here. Small individual acts of solidarity, repeated millions of times. That wasn't Hungary we were watching just then. That is Canada. If Canadians can do it, this country can and should do it. The international sound of resistance to Donald Trump was heard in the British House of Commons. And the language used to describe Donald Trump was on a par with the language Winston Churchill used to describe Adolf Hitler during World War II.
Hitler is a monster of wickedness.
A monster of wickedness. Words to describe the worst, most murderous dictator in European history and world history. And yesterday, in the British Parliament, the words, "He is a dangerous and corrupt gangster," were used to describe the President of the United States, an office once occupied by the president who beat Adolf Hitler in World War II. The leader of the free world is a phrase invented during the television age and applied by the American news media to the President of the United States, while most of the rest of the world didn't quite see it that way. The phrase was always a fiction, falsely suggesting that the world could be led by anyone, or even half the world, the so-called free world, could be led. The American news media that so mindlessly used that term for all of Donald Trump's lifetime has, unconsciously, I presume, dropped it. When is the last time you heard Donald Trump referred to as the leader of the free world? No one in the news media could possibly use that phrase about him now. The news media that so overdid that phrase has mercifully dropped it without ever having had a meeting about, hey, let's not use that phrase anymore. It just disappeared. It's just so obvious to everyone, including everyone in the news media, that Donald Trump is not even a leader of his own country. And so the phrase has disappeared, leader of the free world. It has just disappeared from recent usage, but it was revived yesterday on the floor of the House of Commons, only to rip it away from Donald Trump. Edward Davey is the leader of the Liberal Democrats in Parliament, and he rose yesterday to say this.
A whole civilization will die tonight. Words I never thought I would hear from an American president. And though Donald Trump thankfully didn't follow through this time, these words are a stark reminder of how reckless, immoral, and completely outside the bounds of international law this president is. Regrettably, he is no friend of the United Kingdom. He is no leader of the free world. He is a dangerous and corrupt gangster, and that is how we must treat him.
A dangerous and corrupt gangster. That will no doubt be the title of at least one biography of Donald Trump, probably by a British historian. That is the kind of description of Donald Trump that will live in history because of where it was given, because of when it was given, and because of the otherwise positive history, centuries of positive history between presidents of the United States and the British Parliament. Presidents of the United States, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt during World War II, were treated as heroes by the British Parliament. Heroes. And now the President of the United States can be called a dangerous and corrupt gangster in Parliament, and no one shouts that down. No one disagrees. And that is how we must treat him, says Edward Davey, and no one disagrees with that. Edward Davey described Donald Trump's latest fit of madness in his war in Iran.
And when it comes to Trump's latest cunning plan to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, that will only escalate this crisis and jeopardize the precarious ceasefire. So it's right that the UK is not joining Trump. And I welcome the Prime Minister convening a summit to offer an alternative to Trump's. We must work with our reliable allies in Europe and the Commonwealth and our partners in the Gulf to bring this conflict to an end and keep open the Strait of Hormuz. That is critical for tackling the cost of living crisis that is getting worse and worse.
And so the American president is now a problem that has to be solved by the British government and other European governments. Donald Trump's war on Iran has now become a war for control of the Strait of Hormuz, and Donald Trump is losing. Donald Trump is also losing elections he interferes in Hungary, and Donald Trump is strengthening the victories of the Liberal Party in Canada that stands in united opposition to Donald Trump and Trumpism. Opposition to Donald Trump, who was indeed Jeffrey Epstein's closest friend for 10 years and is now the world's most dangerous and corrupt gangster.